Hello, and welcome to What's That Behind You, the podcast. This is episode 2. I really want to start this video off by just saying thank you to everyone who jumped on episode 1. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, there is lots more to come, as I did state in that video. If you are new to the channel, please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button, and also consider liking the video because it does help with the algorithm. But episode 2, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be, if you haven't listened to one of these podcasts already, they're going to be a little bit more free flowing. Put them on in the background, listen to them, get yourself comfy, and just join me along for the ride. We are allowed to be a little bit more outspoken and a little bit more genuine when it comes down to beliefs and things like that. So episode 2 is going to be along the lines of cryptozoology. I tentatively named it What the Ness. We're going to be talking about the Loch Ness Monster. Now, let's get the personal ideas out of the way first. I am a believer in cryptozoology. It is a field that I do believe in some of it, and I state some of it because there are some really unbelievable stuff out there. There are some really sort of crazy stuff, and you kind of have to sit there and go, some of it is not real. Plain and simple, some of it is not real. But I am a believer in some of it. I do believe that some ecosystems can sustain maybe some kind of cryptid. The Loch Ness one is kind of not one for me. I don't necessarily believe in Loch Ness Monster, and I know I might be ruffling a few feathers with that statement. People who may have seen it, if you have, please let me know down in the comments if you've got any experience with good old Nessie. But we're going to get into it. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about sustaining a beast of that size in good old Loch Ness, and we'll get into it. So where better to start the episode than what is Nessie? Nessie is a Loch Ness Monster. So monster is used incredibly loosely, and probably up there in popularity behind Bigfoot, the other world most famous cryptid, I would say. So you've got Nessie and Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call him, but that's another person for another episode. But Nessie, depending on where you've listened to or watched or anything along those lines, has been spotted for nearly 1,500 years. So there's a lot of lineage and a lot of history behind the sightings and the idea of the Loch Ness Monster. Now, is Nessie a monster? Depending on who you listen to, it's been described as a large aquatic beast. It's been tried to be explained to be a dinosaur that's swimming around the lakes of Loch Ness. I'm sorry if I've offended anyone from Scotland by saying lakes. I don't mean lakes, the lochs. But it's been described to be a lot of things. Some people say it's a long-necked beast with a humped back, small head, flippers and a tail. Others have stated that it could be more sea serpent-like. So the problem that we have straight off the bat is the idea of Nessie. Rather than giving us one straight answer of what Nessie looks like, Nessie gets muddled up and mixed into some kind of monstrosity, from, like I said, a sea serpent style long snake to a wake in the water. We've also seen a mass. While I was doing the research for this video, there is a mass of different images and different pictures. Now, my belief straight off the bat with this one is, if we had one definitive idea of how Nessie looks, then this would be slightly more believable. Like I said at the beginning of the video, cryptids are something that I'm really interested in. I think some ecosystems and some areas can hold a giant beast or something along those lines. I hark back to the big cats of Britain. There are plenty of livestock stuff like that, but that's where the first nail in the coffin comes for Nessie. In Loch Ness, we can look at a lot of different things. We can look at a lot of different sort of facts, figures, sheets, sonar, everything else, which we will get into a little bit later on in the episode. But is there really enough to sustain a beast of that size? If there was a beast of that size, it'd need multiple in there so it could breed. We're not looking at an asexual creature that's able to breed on its own. We'd be looking not just for one Nessie, we'd be looking for a family. And if we were looking for a family, I'm sure that would be a lot easier to spot than just one Loch Ness Monster spotted sporadically through the years. But that starts us on the quest of Nessie. That starts us on the quest of Nessie without me getting too much into my personal beliefs straight off the bat. Now, Loch Ness is massive. It's absolutely massive. It's 22 miles long and 1.5 miles, or just over 1.5, actually 1.7 miles wide. Its surface area alone is 21 square miles, and the depth is 433 feet. So size-wise, it's got enough to actually sustain something. But when I say something, I know that things like dolphins have been spotted in Loch Ness, and many a fish and many an otter and things like that, small creatures that have been able to sustain itself off a little ecosystem. But obviously Loch Ness Monster, if we talk about Loch Ness Monster for what we've seen, it's a massive creature. It's not something small. That massive creature will need quite a lot to eat, quite a lot to move, and we've seen, unfortunately, harking back to things like orcas in SeaWorld, they need space and they need sustaining somehow. Now, can we say that 22 miles is not big enough? Can we say that a mile wide is not big enough? Not definitively. Not definitively. But that sort of size, that sort of body of water, can it sustain a family of these things? That sort of nails it for me, because there'd be at least a mating pair and a baby at any one time. Whether they not be a baby, but where do they go after they've given? See, I'm going off on a tangent already. But whereabouts would they go once they've mated, once they've bred? And where do they go after? I can't imagine a group of cryptids being born, raised, living, dying in this body of water without being spotted on multiple occasions. Even the rarest of creatures on the planet have been spotted multiple times. We may have not seen their mating rituals, we may have not seen any of the decent information, but we have spotted them. Now, what's not to say, walking down the side of Loch Ness one day, doing a quarter of it or something along those lines on a good day's hike, that you wouldn't see at least one swimming across the surface. Now, when we go to the evidence for Nessie, there has been many sightings of wakes and uncharacteristic water movements that people have put down to Nessie swimming across the lake. But the thing is it deep enough? Is it long enough? This is where it sort of baffles my mind. I don't think, and this is only the personal opinion from Blathering Idiot. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a cryptozoologist specialist or anything like that. I'm just a guy with beliefs. Like, hopefully you guys are watching this and listening through to this. But for me, there'd be far more evidence in somewhere that big. If we've got something that's massive and an actual beast swimming through that lake, that loch, then there'd be a lot more evidence for it. Even dead bodies. The way that the stories go, we never see a dead body. There's never anything that's washed up onto shore or anything like that. It's always spotted by a tourist or a scientist or something like that, and that's the end of the story. It's never, we've found a dead specimen on the side of the loch and we're going to do tests on it. Now, harking back to when I said about Bigfoot, even Bigfoot, we find hairs, we find footprints, we find fecal matter, we find anything that can go to be tested. Even if it's disproven, we still get stuff for testing. And this is where this sort of lies for me. There's not much in the wake of evidence other than a few grainy photos, which, going on to the photos, quite a lot of them are all automatically discouraged as fakes and hoax, because people want to believe in this, and that's the big side of it to me. People want to believe in Nessie, and to me that's why there's been so many sightings. Because if you look back, and like I said, I'm a believer in cryptozoology. I'm not necessarily trying to disprove anything in this podcast, but if you go to a lot of the pictures, the webcam footage and things like that, you never see a head poking out. You never see something swimming across the water. Now, a lot of the stories behind Nessie is that it could be a plesiosaur, or it could be something from time gone by still out there in the water. Now, what we always see is two humps, or a hump moving across the water, or something eel-like moving across the water. Now, you never see a head come up to breathe. You never see a tail flap. Even whales, when you see them moving around in the water, you see tail flaps. But the spottings and the sightings that we always see are always a hump that moves across the water. Now, one of the things that go against Nessie is although Loch Ness is not tidal, there are some wakes in there. There are some movements of water that can be explained as just that. Now, when you're standing a couple of 100 feet or even a mile away from the water, you're going to see a movement in the water and not be able to explain it. Now, one of the other things that goes towards Nessie is sonar. The amount of people that run sonar, we've had multiple investigations throughout the years of the loch where they have discovered something large moving around in the water. Now, if there was something large moving around in the water, if there was something large swimming around in the water, would we have not seen something a little bit more concrete when it comes down to evidence? Because I think that there would, and like I said, this is just the opinion of a blathering idiot. This is not a specialist. But if we were to see something along those lines, if we were to note that there is something large swimming underneath it via sonar, then surely we would have seen some evidence. You could have a giant poop that floated across the water, or you could have something, a dead body. That would be one for me. A scale, or even a toenail clipping, or something like that. Just some evidence to be able to put it towards scientists and say, please test this. Let's have a look. The problem with sonar is, obviously, I've been looking over some of the sonar evidence of Nessie, and it just states a large object. Now, a lot of it is scanned quite frequently. The Loch Ness is scanned, and they do discover large things that move around. Now, these large things could be large fish, it could be logs that have gone punky and are underwater and move, but there's no definitive sort of ideas. Even if I keep on harking back to Bigfoot, even with Bigfoot, there's footprints, there's everything else. Whether them footprints are made by human beings or by Bigfoot himself, they're still there and still spotted. Now, I go back to it, that the idea of a single creature swimming around in Loch Ness is one of the things that just kind of tweaks me a little bit. It gets me a little bit behind the gills, because it's not the same creature that's been spotted for 1,500 years. It's not. We've got to be realistic. Even tortoises and turtles that live in the Galapagos, a couple of 100 years old and things like that, we don't really see anything that lives that long nowadays. But honestly, there is a official Loch Ness Monster sightings register, which we will go over in the next part. But there seems to be more evidence to disprove the idea of Nessie than there is to prove it, and that's what I don't like about it. I like the idea of cryptozoology. Like I said, it's not something that I'm trying to just poo-poo upon all the way through, but Nessie is just one of those that, for the life of me, I just can't get behind and can't believe. Now, one of the things that people are using to try and gain this belief and this belief system and get your head around the idea that this could be real is the official register for sightings, which we'll get into in a little bit. But obviously, these are the tools that people need. I'm quite easily swayed when it comes down to something like this. Now, the evidence behind it is obviously quite difficult because it's a lot of wavy water pictures and a little bit of sonar, but if we were to be able to see some kind of evidence, some kind of idea behind it. Now, the idea behind it is, obviously, I want to see some physical evidence. I want to see something a little bit more. I'd like to see some video evidence, some proper video evidence. So if you guys know of any, please let me know down in the comments. But it's one of those I would really, really like to believe, and that's the whole idea behind this channel. And without going too into depth of the channel, that's the whole idea. I want to believe, and I think we're all in that sort of boat and all in that sort of emphasis that we want to believe, and we want to believe in something that's a bit higher than us and a bit better than us. So the evidence behind it and the ability to gain that evidence and grab that evidence is key. And one of the ways that they do that is using this official register. Now, we're going to get into the official register in a second, but with things like this, these are where people are able to be credited with their pictures and their sonar and stuff like that. So let's get into it quickly. Going on to the sightings register, like 2021, 2022, there were seven sightings of Nessie in 2022. Following on from that, there was 6 sightings in 2021, and then through the years, there's been like between 4 and 6 every year. And to be fair, looking through them, they're all sort of very easily explained, barring 1 or 2. And that's from an idiot's eyes. I can look at those and say that's the wakes of the water. We know, as I've already stated in the video, that the water is moving. Loch Ness is moving. It goes out in multiple places, so there's always going to be movement. And that's one of the things. They're very easily explained, and that's why I would really like to see something else, whether that be a picture of a head, whether that be a picture of a tail flip. Obviously, when we see orcas and whales swimming through the sea, we see tails. So what's not to say we can see something that's causing these massive tidal? Now, the big thing is there's a couple of sonar pictures, and I think I've already stated it about sonar being one of the sort of great beneficiaries of Loch Ness Monster, because 400 meters down, 200 meters down, and people are seeing big things. But that's not to say that it's not something that's very easily explainable. Now, some of the things aren't easily explainable as well, which is what kind of blows my mind about this. Like, I keep on going back to it. Like Bigfoot, we still see things. We see video footage, even if that video footage is a hoax. And they're the things that I want to be able to see. I'd like science to do its part and find the evidence that we are so desperately requiring. And Nessie, for me, is just one that will always be sort of a mascot. It'll always be a story that Scottish people tell the world about, but we just don't have that fixed evidence, that fixed idea. One, going back to the beginning of the episode, we don't even know on a genuine term what Nessie is supposed to look like. The waters are so muddied in how Nessie is supposed to look, in how she reacts and everything else. I just nail one story and stick with it. That's kind of where I sit with Nessie. It needs to be a set line, a set idea, just the same as everything else. Normally, I know mass hysteria has part and parcel of a lot of things, but when we talk about alien abductions, when we talk about Bigfoot, they're all the same sort of idea and all the same character, and all of the same stories. We see flying discs, we see little green men, we see a big, hairy, 7-foot, ape-like creature that walks the woods. The Chupacabra, the Mothman, they're all stories that are solidified by one defining factor, and that is how it looks, or roughly how it looks, rather than how it looks definitively. Nessie is one that doesn't. She changes, she shapeshifts, she looks like one thing and then she ends up being another. The theories are she's a giant snake, she's a plesiosaur. There's so many muddied water stories that go along with Nessie. We nearly ended up talking about the footballer then, but they're normally so muddied, and the ideology behind Nessie is so muddled that we will never get to a point where Nessie is definitively one or the other. Now, the ecosystem that she lives in, could it sustain something? I don't know. Personally, I don't know, and I leave that to you guys. It's large enough to sustain something. Is it large enough to sustain something that large? I don't know. And that's where I have to leave that one. But Nessie as a whole, for me, is one that will always be sat there in make-believe, just because there's not enough defining evidence to even create a conversation properly. We've had sonar, we've had images, we've had all sorts of little snippets that could be, but we never quite get to the end of it. After my little ramble on, please let me know what you think down in the comments. I've been Adam from What's That Behind You. This has been the podcast episode 2. If you are new to the channel, please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. Like the podcast if you can, and follow on all other medias. Anyway, that has been episode 2 of the podcast. This has been a little bit rambly, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and I've managed to wind away 25 minutes of your life. So I shall catch you on the next episode.